Jon Jones may well be the most naturally talented fighter to ever set foot in a mixed martial arts octagon. He is almost the perfect fighting specimen, a one-in-a-generation talent that we watched growing before our very eyes. To celebrate the great career of this future Hall of Famer, let's take a look at 5 different times that showed us this longtime champion pushing the boundaries of mixed martial arts.
It's time!
Jon Jones vs. Shogun Rua. If you haven't already watched the 23-year-old Jon Jones' fight against Shogun Rua for the light heavyweight title, at the time, watching this incredible performance unfold was like getting a sneak preview of what the future held for the sport. In one corner, you had Shogun, a tried and tested legend of the sport, a man with a solid base of fundamentals and a skill set that, when combined with his uncoachable grit, made him one of his era's defining fighters. But opposite him on that night was something entirely new. Jon Jones was not like any other opponent Shogun had stood across from. 6'4" and built with an insane 84-inch reach, Jones was a level of athlete that the UFC had never encountered before, blessed with the ability to learn and implement wild, unorthodox techniques immediately after learning them. This, as you might expect, made Jones a very rough matchup for the champ Rua. And despite being on the verge of becoming the youngest champion in UFC history, Jones had the audacity to open the fight with a flying knee. This man was very clearly not nervous, and over the next 3 rounds, he proceeded to put on an absolute masterclass, brushing off the old style of the Brazilian legend and totally dominating him for as long as the bout lasted. In the end, it was clear that even the great Shogun Rua was out of his depth, and after Jon nailed him with a cracking body shot and a follow-up knee, the referee stepped in, just as Shogun himself had started to tap out to the strikes. A coming-of-age moment, yes. But in many ways, as MMA fans, we knew after this fight that we were very much traveling into uncharted territory, blessed with a prospect-turned-champion who was as good as any fight we've ever witnessed lace up gloves. Jon Jones vs. Lyoto Machida. If you're looking for an example of the first fight that Jon Jones was forced to really overcome some issues in, look no further than his title defense against the legendary Lyoto Machida. If you know anything about Machida, you will know that he's a lethal striker, a guy whose darting style of karate striking can make him a major threat. Lyoto's speed in particular was cited by some as an interesting counter to Jones's immense reach. And in the opening round of his fight with Jones, against all odds, Machida was able to have some real success, tagging the young champion repeatedly by blitzing him with a series of fast punches. Coming out of that first 5 minutes, it was clear that Jones was struggling to impose himself on the fight, or at least that's how it seemed. But if you're searching for a moment that saw Jones truly prove his championship mettle, round 2 of this matchup did exactly that. Jones turned it all around in the second, pressing the action to a greater extent than he had done in the first, eventually finding himself in the clinch with the Dragon. And once Machida's confidence was shook, Jones really started to take over, landing a huge Superman punch that sent Lyoto to the canvas. Sensing his moment to pounce, Jones latched onto Machida's neck as he tried to stand up, eventually choking the former champ unconscious as he stood. And in a truly cold move, as the ref stepped in to separate the two, Jones dropped Machida's unconscious body to the floor and walked off. It was a shockingly good win and one of Jon's most iconic finishes. Not only was an excellent victory over a bona fide icon of the sport, but it also showcased Jon Jones' adaptability, answering the question of just how good he would be when he was no longer the hammer but the nail. After a tough round 1, Jones came out and totally destroyed Machida in the second, and that really does tell you everything you need to know about his greatness. Jon Jones vs. Chael Sonnen. Okay, hear us out. We know that Jones' showdown with Chael Sonnen is not necessarily the most celebrated fight in Jones' career. But if you're really looking for a showcase of Jones' levels, the level of disdain and disrespect he showed for Chael's skills in this one certainly deserves a mention. Look, even a casual fan could tell you that Jones had virtually no chance of losing against a fighter with Sonnen's limited approach. But it really did seem as though Jon went out there and chose to try and beat Chael at his own game. So instead of keeping him at range and chipping away his defenses, Jones literally moved in and turned it into a Chael Sonnen fight, using the clinch up close and personal to wear on Sonnen. Virtually every takedown was simple, and as soon as he had the space to posture up and pursue the TKO finish, he was able to with little issue. But here's the crazy thing. Unbeknownst to us, Jones had actually broken one of his toes in grotesque fashion early in the fight. It was so badly bent out of shape that the doctors would have no doubt stopped the fight if Jones had made it back to his corner ahead of round 2. Jon himself didn't even notice until he was being interviewed by Joe Rogan post-fight. Had he not TKO'd his opponent so quickly, Sonnen would have been promoted to UFC light heavyweight champion. Sure, he wouldn't have been a legit champ of course, but it's a funny thought. To put it simply, Jones was literally in a position where he was seconds away from losing his title, and without even realizing it, he still managed to get the finish in the first round, all while fighting in a manner that could be deemed as a direct insult to his opponent. Fights like this are often a good way to get a sense of just how far ahead a fighter like Jones actually is. And though there are more iconic wins in his resume, this one was as easy and dominant a win as you will ever see from a fighter at championship level. Jon Jones vs Daniel Cormier second. There's nothing quite like a great rivalry, a heated feud that brings out the best in both fighters after a long and often tense build-up. Well, unfortunately for Daniel Cormier, while he did bring one hell of a lot energy to every single media appearance or fight week ceremony when it came to standing across from Jon Jones, replicating that energy in the octagon just never came as easy. Their first fight was a pretty comprehensive win for Jones, although he didn't exactly manage to make a massive statement. No, that statement would be reserved for their rematch. At UFC 214, these two met when they were both very clearly in their prime. And for this rematch, it's pretty fair to say that DC had some better moments than in the first fight. But throughout the entire bout, Jones was making a point of relentlessly hammering Cormier's body, slowly sapping him of his energy and, more important, getting him to think about the attacks going downstairs. To the naked eye, it seemed as though Cormier was actually having a pretty good fight, tagging Jon repeatedly with a level of swagger that maybe, just maybe, would result in an almighty upset. But little did we know that Jones was slowly setting him up for the kill shot. And in round 3, his most famous finish of all came. A huge head kick that sent Cormier into a total daze. From there, a deft trip allowed Jones to take top position. And boy did he let all of his anger at DC come to the floor. The massive ground and pound maybe should have been stopped a shot or two earlier, but either way the TKO was given. Of course, this result would later be overturned due to positive PED test from Jon Jones. But all in all, the performance itself from this light heavyweight legend spoke volumes about his prowess. As DC himself tearfully said during the post-fight interview, it's not like there's really much of a rivalry when one guy is 2-0. But either way, beating a fighter of Daniel Cormier's ability is really the most prestigious win in Jones's catalog. Jon Jones vs Alexander Gustafsson second. Jon Jones clearly has a good record in rematches, and when you consider just how crazy a back-and-forth war his first fight with Alexander Gustafsson was, it's pretty wild how totally dominant Jon was able to be in their second. In his own words, Jones was at the peak of his party boy lifestyle ahead of the first Gustafsson fight, and like many of us, he was probably just as shocked at how good Gustafsson actually was, how competitive the Swede was able to be in there against the greatest talent in the sport. It was pretty clear that Jon had made the mistake of underestimating the Mauler during their first fight, and while it resulted in an all-time great championship bout, there's no doubt that Jon was disappointed in himself. So when the opportunity to take on Gustafsson again came during his second 205-pound title reign, Jon jumped at the opportunity. And judging things from the outside, it did seem as though Jon was far better prepared this time around. The opening rounds showcased some of the best defensive work we've ever seen from Jon, as he used his superior head movement and blocking to evade and parry all of Gustafsson's best efforts to make it a boxing match. Jones seemed to just have his number on the feet, but in the next round, that's when the hammer really fell. Jon switched it up on a second's notice, finding a big takedown that immediately saw him establish top position. From there, he easily sliced through Gustafsson's defenses before finding side control. Once there, he postured up and began to rain down on his old rival with hellacious ground and pound. Before too long, the referee knew that Gustafsson's chances of escaping were virtually non-existent and awarded Jones the TKO victory. A sweet revenge for Jones that really put his overall evolution into perspective.